is you might have seen that the Esports Awards did like a bunch of awards for the decade. Now, listen, that's already a little bit fraught because like they are essentially not doing a traditional decade of like, you know, the 2000s, the 2010s, what they're doing is they're doing from like this year, 10 years back. And by the way, I'm not even sure they even ran in 2015. I think they began in 2016. So I guess their logic is at the end of this year, it's been a decade. It's a decade counting from like 2016 to the end of this year, basically. So in doing so, they've done a bunch of awards that are like broadcast. So if you don't know, for example, like broadcast start of the decade was like Shocks, I believe, or Host or whatever. Like she won that one. By the way, that's quite obvious. If you don't know, she'd already won that award something like 3 times before. I will say she did last year when she launched her own awards, go out of her way to say publicly that she'd asked not to be nominated for the Esports Awards, which one, as I said in my Cradle video, does imply you think there's something wrong with it or you don't want to be associated with it. And 2, just seems a bit rich when you then turn around and go, but thanks for calling me the broadcast decade. Which is it? Are you not accepting it or are you accepting it? You know, I'm just saying, which is it? So that's a bit off. But the key thing here, Yamato, is, as I said, aside from that tiny little bit of flame that leaked out there, I don't actually have any flame for this, mate, because they've actually done a fairly good job. Like the 2 League of Legends ones, people will be interested in. The Shocks one's a fairly obvious one. I don't even know, by the way. For League, no one else would even be in the fucking conversation, would they? Like Dash wasn't around long enough. Before that, what people like Quickshot, I guess, sort of vaguely go into that. The problem is then he did a lot of casting and other things too. So that one's obvious. And believe it or not, Yamato, that buckle up, T1 fans who are all ready to type your really low IQ comments in the YouTube channel. Because if you don't know, by the way, Yamato, do you want to know how fucking actually broken T1 fans are now? Do you know what the go-to actual complaint now, Yamato, is? It's not like we're mean to T1, you know, we're haters. The go-to complaint now might be the stupidest complaint I've ever seen. The complaint is, you're just talking about T1 every week. It's a fucking weekly review show of all the major regions in League of Legends, you mad fuck. By the way, do you want to know something, boys? Spoiler, I'll tell you how we can stop talking about T1 forever. T1 ever become some, like, fucking freaks level team who's at the bottom of that shit group and it's just, yeah, then guess what we won't talk about them. Think how rarely we talk about DRX on this show. Again, the problem here, you cretins, is they're one of the most relevant teams in the fucking game. In fact, the entire episode they complained about that on you, Mark. Like, why did you talk about T1 all the time? That was the episode where we talked about how they could win worlds, for fuck's sake. I think that'd make them pretty relevant to the convo. So anyway, that's all to say the following, Yamato. They're obviously used to, because there's also, by the way, they give away that T1 fans are all really new to being even T1 fans. They weren't there at the original Faker run. It's because they all get super butthurt when you say something like, you know, the 2024 lineup one isn't the best team to ever play League. Like, that's such a noob reaction to get really offended by that. Because I don't know anyone, even the people who say they would be, would start with like, well, you know, because of the championship, they'd all be like quite reasonable. So anyway, that's all to say, Yamato. There is one award that I totally agree with that Faker just won, which is Faker won Player of the Decade. Now, it isn't, by the way, League of Legends. It's Esports Player of the Decade. But do you know what? And this is going to blow your mind, fans, because I actually know what I'm talking about. I was there. I was there, Gandalf. I was there when he should have thrown that ring into the fucking Mount Doom. So anyway, the point is, Yamato, even, believe it or not, I'm not even going to do an angle of like, but that's just like, no, actually, if you look at all esports games, here's the difference. There are people from other games that can be in this conversation. Simple from Counter-Strike's an obvious one. He's been Player of the Year 3 times if people don't know. And it's been just an amazing body of work. You can obviously there's a few people from Dota you could probably put in there, maybe Samail or Miracle or something like that. Some sick player from Dota. For League themselves, technically you could put people like Chovy in for their body of work. They just wouldn't have the accomplishments. But the difference is, I actually think that is actually probably one of the most deserved awards Faker can win. Because if you ever really look, if you ask someone like me who's watched all of esports history in the big games, you notice I don't put a lot of modern day people next to Faker, actually. I actually, outside of League, a lot of them are going to be people who wouldn't even be covered by this decade. It'd be like Flash from StarCraft. Well, StarCraft Brood War was before this decade, so he wouldn't even be in here. If you want to go like Rafa from Quake, I mean, he had a bit of Quake Champions, but a lot of that, again, is like end of the 2000s, early 2010s. So actually, believe it or not, I think that is probably one of the most deserved awards Faker can win, actually. If you had to say who was the best esports player, because remember, 2015 would catch like the end of what... I will say that part. The one flaw is this, Yamato, is how does the decade part work? Because if you didn't have an award in 2015, how can it start in 2015? And if it doesn't start in 2015, we are actually only counting 2016 championship to now. So we're counting 3 of the world championships. But even so, 3's more than anyone else won. It's just I noticed there was some scuff shit there. Some people say they won 4. And it's like, it depends on what the year. And this is why the decade part gets complicated. But anyway, to bring it all back, what are your thoughts on this? Faker, basically esports player of the decade, just the best player in the last 10 years of esports. Fair award?
I think so. I think also just the timing of League's popularity, right, over the last 10 years.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I think that's so crucial in a conversation like that, because I think in terms of the longevity of other esports, like CS, sure, but it's like the games have changed. We went from Go to 2, and the era shifted too. I think the fact that League has been so popular for such a long time, and it's been like the tournaments in terms of like the size of the scope of the World Championship is. As like also the timing of it is also really neat, because it's like 2015 Faker, 2016 Faker, 2017 Faker, and then there's like the whole in between. I think if there was a world where T1 didn't make the same level of a resurgence, then I think there would be just other names in the conversation from League, like Chovy, as you mentioned, because, or like even like a player like Knight, because these guys would be the ones to win the championships that Faker wouldn't.
All the MVPs, all the shit, yeah, of course.
And in the end, it's like the fact that Faker managed to win Worlds so deep into his career and do it back to back, and also being in the finals, I think just makes him so untouchable. It's like the separation of time is so impressive, because it's like we were there when he was performing so good in the past, and that's why we also appreciate a player like Ruler or a player like Deft when they are managing to do shit really deep into their career, because it's just so unheard of in a game that is just changing all the time. It's like there's some OGs, that there's a crew of OGs that just are untouchable, because everything else around them has changed, whether it's the game, the players, the coaches, the names of teams even, but they stick around. But Faker has done it better than anybody. And I don't know super much about other esports, but hearing you say the same in terms of the context of CS and so forth, like I just have to follow suit then, because in the end, I think the popularity and the scope of the game, I think also is super important, because someone's gonna tell me like there's a Bloodline Champions Legend or some game that is like obscure, like it doesn't really matter too, because in the end, like it needs to be like a really, really big title.
No, the key thing as well is, like, essentially, like most of Faker's career, he's just got it all, mate. Here's the thing. If we're counting that decade, look, we are cutting off a couple of his absolute best peak years, like 2013, 2014, maybe even 2015. But you've still got enough there. You've still got a couple of, like, prime years, 2016, 2017. Then you've got, I agree, it's a bit, I'll tell you what we should do. Last week, because we're going to do it again this week, but in a different way. Last week we did that discussion about BDD and Showmaker, and how they almost have, like, inverse careers. Like, they both had, like, initially a lot of success, but then in the middle, the difference is BDD looked like he dipped a bit and just became like a very good middler, but not like, the best middler. Whereas Showmaker like maintained in the middle. He was like, people will forget this now, people have short memories in esports. If you go back in time to 2021, all the conversations on all the shows, because it was a foregone conclusion Damwon was going to win everything, was are Showmaker and Canyon the best jungle mid players to ever play the game collectively, and maybe even apart? Because remember, if they were about to they were winning something like their third LCK in a row, they were only like a game off winning the fucking MSI. Obviously, logically, if they'd have won that Worlds and have gone back to back, at this point in time, people did think this is like a Faker-esque career. This guy's going up. But the difference is, you saw in the years after that, it's what you call diminishing returns. Like, it just got worse for Showmaker. They became less relevant. BDD had sort of the opposite one. Like I say, in the middle, he had sort of the down, but then he's had like a resurgence now where he's mega. Faker had the really interesting one, because his actually, in a weird way, is easier to follow the thread of, mate. He just starts super insanely good individually. For me, I always think the lost part, maybe I'll do an article about this, by the way, is actually the era when he doesn't win that many championships except LCK. It's like the sort of 2019 to 2021 period before you fully get all the, OGFK, Z or GK people come in, when they just brought in at the end. Because in that era, I always used to think that was actually the hardest era of Faker to analyse, because if you watched, he wasn't the best individual mid laner in the game or the most dominant carry, but he wasn't like this Faker now that's more like, the captain and has to be pinched in the draft and has to be really that's basically now, this is why Faker in some ways is like an old man in League. Because if you know old man game in in most sports, what that refers to is the idea that you like min-max your energy because you're not a young pup, you can't run all the time. So if you ever see the classic, like really all-time great players that are old, man, I'll give you a fucking pull from the archives right now in football, you might. Do you remember the amazing attacking midfielder called Clarence Seedorf from the Netherlands? Do you remember this guy?
Of course.
Like, this was
I
a
didn't
guy
know Clarence, but when you said Seedorf, I was in the loop. I was like,
Mate,
Clarence,
if people
who?
don't know, this guy was still winning the Champions League, etc., like right near the end of his career, because he's like the ultimate example of this. Who went from like physical specimen to like you're never in the wrong place on the pitch. You know, you never use too much. You don't try and do 15 step overs and run around 4 people when there's no reason. You just wait till there's the one moment where you get an opening and you go through. And you do the perfect, your veteran smart. That's what to me like Faker's career became now. But people do forget that part in the middle was also like fairly legit. Like if you remember, that was the era when I always used to think he wasn't the best player, but the genius of his career in the middle, that like 2019-20, is he used to just deny all the other Koreans the fucking title. Like people like my aforementioned BDD and Ruler, fucking Chovy and Viper, they were all like, right, it's my time to win, isn't it? And then Faker would just literally wouldn't even be the best team. The finals would just happen. He'd just pop in. They'd be like, oh, I'm a bit nervous. And Faker would be like, I'll take that. Listen, I've got a bunch of these. I'll take that for now. You listen, you're going to get me back so hard in the future years. You're probably going to win loads. I'll take this one again. Listen, it's better if I take this all with me. It's like fucking foster guys. It's got safe kids. I've got a bunch of them back there. They used to just fucking take like actually taking candy from a baby, just take championships from these motherfuckers, which I always thought was kind of a cool period because actually he was like in the middle at that point. Like he still had some game individually. Like he could do some cool plays if you put on a mage, and he was still like a championship player type winner. But the difference is, if you go look at those squads, they're way more scuffed, mate. They are the squads that have like fucking Canna top lane, like fucking Teddy, ADC, like that's not the same. Like that's why I always thought T1 fans they revealed that they're really just Faker fans in this latter era, because what they ignored is to try and make it sound like Faker was still like the god carry for mid lane. By definition, you have to downplay Zeus and fucking Gumayushi, don't you? Or Carrier or something like that. You have to sort of make it like that's just him and fucking 4 bots, isn't it? It's like, not really. So actually, I think it's totally legit that he wins. Because as I say, the difference is there are other people who are truly great players. Like, here's the difference. Maybe Simple, like, individually was better because that was basically the prime of his career. But Simple doesn't have the same amount of accomplishments, by the way. Like, that's one of the things one of the things me and Dom concluded a couple of years, actually, even before Faker won these last Worlds, is the real thing that makes Faker sort of like very difficult to ever beat in a GOAT conversation is if you actually look at his whole career, he has both parts, mate. He has the insane individual level of play and years at the top. It doesn't have to be the whole time. 3 or 4 years is insane, but he's fucking unbelievable. And then he has basically every accomplishment you could want in the game. Like he's just won 1 billion fucking LCK. I mean, the joke of his career, mate, it's like the Djokovic factor. It's like he also wins on all the courts. Like you can't even, the only angle you can really find to hit on Faker is the angle of like, but he didn't do what like BDD, he's not still trying to individually be the best. In fact, I would even say, I want to ask you about this actually. 1, what do you think of Faker's career progression? But 2, I have to say more and more the last few years, when I even look at some of these peers of his like this, who maintain the individual level, even when I watch rookie play, etc., I do actually think that at some point in his career, maybe he just didn't stress it because it's like a Korean thing. I do get the feeling that over the last few years, he has had some sort of like pressing wrist issue or some sort of a mechanical thing that has helped. Because to me, his like dips up and down don't just look like normal form. You just play badly, you feel bad. It looks like there's a time in the season, every season, where he's like almost like his wrist gets worn out and he can't do all the crazy moves. And then if you notice, that's why we always say it's that like 2 to 3 weeks where you don't play before Worlds. Feels like it gives him the refresher. He comes out he just comes out, it's like he's had a fucking sauna or something. He comes out like, oh, fucking, I feel amazing. And then he's ready to play. And remember, at Worlds, the beauty of Worlds is, realistically, you don't even have to be that good in the Swiss system now, mate. You just have to keep your shit together for 3 BO5. If you can do 3 BO5 in about 2 weeks, there you go, you can win Worlds. And I tell you what, no one's better at understanding the flow of how to peak and get your shit together and work yourself into form. He's the best of that, right? Do you think he has some sort of issue?
No, definitely. I think it reminds me of like, when you hear before the camp, before the big fight, he injures his knee, but he's just like, he just wants to win so badly, he doesn't care. And then you see like their stance is like a little bit different in the way that they stand. Because in the end, it's like, I remember the era of like when Faker was, performing at his individual best. Like he was streaming all the time. His stream was just perma on. He would scrim, do the streams, and he would just play an absurd amount of games. And I think that was what was just required of him to maintain such a high level performance naturally. But then just in conjunction with the periods where he actually actively got a break, you could clearly see like an improvement in performance, because for the longest time, always the summers were rough because they were post MSI and they always made deep runs in MSI. Even now, even though T1 were competitive, it's like now we can talk about it later. It's like how they dip in performance, but it was always kind of the same trend. Spring started very, very good because he has this Christmas break, December, takes it easy. Spring started always good. And then up to spring finals look good. MSI, little break. And then all the way leading up to Worlds, there was always trouble. Whether it was when he needed to take like a longer break because of his injury and Poby came in, or even last year when they barely, like they lost against Damwon, like the Damwon that lost 3 back-to-back best of threes at the World Championship to just let the Chinese teams qualify to the quarterfinals. Like they lost against that Damwon.
No one's been memory hold, mate. No one remembers that match. They remember that they almost lost to KT, but everyone's deleted the one where Damwon, I think they even 3-0'd them. I think Damwon just like straight 3-0'd these motherfuckers.
I don't remember the scoreline. I think it was 3-2. I don't know what it was, but I just remember Showmaker LeBlanc in the final game. That was the decider, and Showmaker was popping off on his LB, and it kind of was like a return to form. Are you pulling it up? Is it 3-2 or was it 3-0?
I'm just looking it up now. Let me have a look.
I remember I was in Texas watching that together with Dom, and Dom was beyond himself. I was sad about that one because I thought that KT and T1 were the two.
It was 3-2. You are right. It was a 3-2. Fair enough.
It was an ultra giga bang. I remember the LeBlanc from Showmaker. But just in conjunction with that, it's clear that something is like plaguing him. And usually when someone has an injury, they kind of figure out ways to still be intact and active.
Yes.
I think the main thing is in the transition, it's like 21, 22. I think the key thing that kind of shifted how LCK went was also the improvement of Chovy. Because I remember that final that they won in summer in 2022, that was like the first revelation of Chovy actively playing like a game where he was in tune with all the game ideas. Yeah. It's like he could play the game through other people. The fact that Chovy managed to do that evolution, it was very clear that he took inspiration from what Faker did.
This is actually, people don't know, just around this time, like 2020, 21, was actually when LS used to do like analysis still on like LCK. And if people don't know, I remember when especially it was when he was in DRX, mate. When Chovy was in DRX, LS once told a story on stream, like as in on the LCK broadcast, that was something along the lines of that supposedly within DRX, they even said that Chovy like barely commed, mate. Like for real, it's like he was playing a solo queue game and he for real was like the mid laner that just farms the side lane and doesn't join the fight or whatever. Like that, I know what you mean. If that's true, and to be fair, that does look like what it looked like how he played back then. He was just like a god of fucking CSing, wasn't he? Like, but if you look, I know what you mean. Almost every year after that, it's why also I hate the T1 fans that like refuse to let people, in the same way as Faker can never get worse. Chovy and Knight are never allowed to get better. Like they're never allowed to improve and overcome their issues. Because I do think if you look, like Chovy year on year, mate, looks like he did add all these different elements, right, and become a different player by the end, right?
And the reason I wanted to highlight that was because like Faker had already changed the player he was in 21 and 22, and he had an advantage. It was like back then, the whole conversation about T1 when they had like that perfect split in spring 2022. The whole conversation was about, oh damn, these guys are just the owner Faker mid jungle duo when they were playing like Gragas Lee Sin, just dominating the map. Yeah. It's like Faker was already shifting his playstyle away from the lane dominant player, and I think that he was just ahead of the curve in making that adaptation. And then eventually Chovy caught up, and I think that the players around him also caught up because BDD also has adopted this kind of identity. The busyness of a Chovy and a BDD is so different if you compare to how they played in the past. Obviously, there's been some like changes in terms of how the mid-wave functions that gives you more opportunities, but there's a clear inspiration. And I think the biggest challenge for Faker nowadays is the fact that now he has these wicked players within the league that are capable of doing both at the same time. Because if you look at, for example, the Rise game that Chovy just played, it's like, oh, he has crazy CS numbers against Zeka, is ahead in the lane, hovers to each play, roams onto the side, and is just there for anything that Canyon wants to do in the game. And in the past, it was like, oh, Chovy had those CS numbers, but he didn't have that impact. And I think that's just the biggest challenge. Like players are just too complete nowadays, and I think that let's say the lack of mechanical skill and the laning from Faker is sometimes like a big hole for them in terms of their matches, especially in the LCK.
By the way, I've got a couple of angles on that. Like, one is this is also why it's funny. One of the things I found really interesting about following sports and esports is actually when someone tells you their opinions, you can almost trace back from their opinions, like how much of the game they've watched and who they're a fan of, etc. And so, unfortunately, one of the things that also gives away to me that you don't actually know what Faker did in the early part of his career. You just looked on Leaguepedia, or you looked on the YouTube video of them winning worlds or something. Is when people like mischaracterize the players and have a really weird sense for them. Because I'll give you an example in sports that reminds me of this. In the same way as there's people like the real reason why we all think you're a noob if you think Faker hard carries the last few years. It's because it's like, bro, you don't know what hard carrying Faker's like. That I'll take you back in a time machine 10 or 13 years and I'll show you some unbelievable games, mate. That'll melt you. Essentially, there are games where, for real, a lot of us speculate like he is the reason like Riot had to fucking nerf Deathfire Grasp, for example, like shit like that. Like, or like if you think about like LeBlanc, bro, LeBlanc is still played in the modern day, but it's like the most nerfed shit of all time. Like, you should see the shit that champion used to be able to do back in the day when it had the silence and stuff, mate. Like that, like people like him were an absolute demon on that shit. Like he was really like getting shit banned. I'll give people an example, right? Which is people might know I'm a Ronaldo fan, Cristiano Ronaldo. And a lot of the Messi fans have this classic way they try to downplay Ronaldo, right? Which they don't know, Yamato. Makes them look like complete noobs and just shows they're all 16 and they never watched him like play. I mean, by the way, he played for like 20 plus years. Like the reason I know they didn't watch that part of his career is because they do that thing where they go, all he does is just hang around the box and just get tap-ins and penalties. And it's like, oh, you've given it away. You only watched the last sort of 8-9 years of his career. Because if you don't know, Ronaldo actually had like quite a bad knee injury, I think it was, in like 2014 or something. And after that, basically, he had to change his game. This is why I'm bringing up this point. And basically, if you don't know, before that, he really did start as actually like a left winger, even though, by the way, he's not even like a left-footed player. He started as a left winger, and then what happened was, when he came to Real Madrid, Jose Mourinho was like testing him as a striker and using him some, but he was like sort of, he had like a moving roam. And when he had this injury, he just couldn't run 24/7 and do all those dribbles. So what he did is, he stopped being the guy that did a million step overs and tried to skin two people and then score the top corner. He just basically became like a fucking number 9. They just put him up front all the time. And what they understood was this concept, which is if you can't run 24/7 because your knee's not as good, just hang around the box and pick your moments. Like pick the moment when you're going to go active. And so, even though there's a grain of truth in what they're saying, it gives away that they don't know the story of how it happened, what the progression was through, etc. Because I do think that's a good example of what you're saying. Essentially, it's funny. We've made this point in the past about junglers, right? Classically, junglers the role that does this the most. Have you noticed how all the great junglers start as like, they may as well be like a 15-year-old Lee Sin player who's just ganking all over the map everywhere. And then by they've played 10 years, if they're still a great jungler, they're all the fucking Maokai, Sejuani, like, I'll come when it makes sense. I'm looking for the angles here. It's no to the top lane for now. I'm going to check out bot lane. I'm going to sell. You become like the objective player, the macro player. You change your whole profile and you don't even try and compete with it. It's actually why, by the way, I agree Canyon probably is the GOAT jungler. He can just do both me. He never got this memo I just said about how you've got to transition. he just does whatever he wants still. He's still cracked out of his mind. It's also why I do hope Tarzan turns out to be legit. He also looks like he has unbelievable longevity. He's still mega hands, etc. But in general, there's that trend. Well, similarly, I do feel like there are so many players where they get to the latter part of their career, and because they can't essentially go head-to-head like athletically and just beat everyone, they don't even try to do that. They just start trying to win with their mind. They're just trying to look for the right point in the game, or they start to even understand bigger fundamentals, bro. Like they start to know more about like how the draft works or what their comp is and when the win conditions are and something. They play to that, instead of just trying to just always win in CS, always solo kill no matter what, always trying to push your lane out. You can see like actually how these people master the game. It's actually why it's sad to me when people like the Perkses of the world, that's all they're doing at the end. There's like no actual game left. There's no fucking laning left. There's no like, you don't have a champion. You're just only trying to find some miracle macro player where you do the one time you go. That eventually does get too far. But I think Pake has struck the perfect balance, bro. Because there's still times, in fact, people probably forget this now because they're not in great form. But like, there's times this year where Faker even like would have individual games where you were like, That's the game where he did just fucking lean forwards like the meme with the controller and start playing.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Well, you go back to like spring and winter. He had a couple of games he smurfed on people. He had to listen. The problem is he can't do it like 5 games in a row like Chovy and Nicky can. It's understandable. It's what happens in your career, right?
And additionally, on top of that, it's like Fearless probably made his job so much more difficult.
Oh, true. Yeah.
Because it's like now it's at least in the previous years he could always like lean into 1, 2, 3. It was always like Oriana over Ari over something, and he leaned into that really really hard. But now when he goes into the deep games, that's when you get like the truly, let's say like poor performances from Fakers.
Yes.
Whether it's like he plays Hui for the first time in 2 years and it looks like wonky and it's all over the place. It's like he has the guts to do it, and he obviously has, probably the strongest resilience as a player within a game. Like if he makes a mistake, it's not you're not really like expected to go full tilt ever. He's going to always be in the game. But I think those are the moments where you realize like, he has limited amount of practice hours he can put in terms of how much effort he can put in at the same time. And then, he needs to be very selective about it. And in Fearless, that just makes the job so much more difficult. That's why in my mind, always, it's like T1 versus Gen G. There are drafts where T1 can be the best team in the world. But if you go further into a series, you're going to have problems. You're just going to have problems.
Yes. Oh, and I'll also add in as well, I do think that is one thing that has been a bit brutal, is if you ever watch those last few years, this is one area where it does play against that conspiracy theory some pleb fans have of like, Riot's just changing the game to make T1 good for Worlds. Look, I will say, they do suspiciously always do stuff like remove the mid-ADCs and the mid-assassins shit. Look, it's true, that doesn't really play the Faker's favour, but I would argue Fearless looks like we had this discussion last week, Fearless looks like it's made it way harder for Faker to win Worlds now, because I'm with you. They not only had like a limited champion pool, and if you notice, they were the champions where they're always just left in the game because everyone plays one side of the Azir Corki. In fact, everyone plays all of them. You know what I mean? Like, these are all the ones that all the mid laners play. But it also looked to me like actually T1 at the time was the most inappropriate team for Fearless because it looked like they'd actually designed every draft like a choose your own adventure, but the first page is always what champion does Faker play in this comp. So if he's playing Oriana, suddenly all the other picks make sense. If he's playing Azir, suddenly you get... The problem you have, like you're saying, is if you're in game 4 and you're super deep into the weeds of the picks and bans, and then the other guy's picked like an Aurora at some point in the draft that you don't expect, like, you shit out of luck. You can't do that style anymore. Like, you haven't got much left over to pick. Also, can you even make the comp work with what works against the... You know what I mean? Like, that's where I agree. I don't even think that's a case of like flame the players. I think everyone for years, I think people think it's just because of year 1 of Fearless. I think we're going to have those issues for years, boys. I don't know if anyone can actually be that good at that many champions and that many combinations. It's like that thing where, have you ever heard the famous thing where if you a sign that you don't know chess is when a pleb will go, there's only 64 squares, because there's something actually like millions of like possible moves, and essentially like there's board configurations people have never seen essentially in a pro match. So to me, that's what drafts like. I don't think people understand. They think you're only picking from these champions. It's like, no, it's like these champions into these other 8 champions with like 60 champions that go around them depending on what you pick. Like, no human can hold that all in their brain. Like, that's not possible. So I agree. I think they're in a way. That's why actually, for real, if they somehow miraculously won Worlds, not just the Doran factor, but I'll give him props for that. I would give Faker the ultimate props for this year's Worlds if he somehow won this one, bro. Because I agree with you. It's going to be nuts if you can win those Fearless drafts like deep into the playoffs of Worlds. And also, man, one thing we haven't even seen yet, we only saw a little bit at MSI, is I want to see when people have to do like the Game 5 pressure draft. Because I think some of those are nuts in Fearless, mate. Like, sometimes for real, you end up with drafts where it's like, I don't even know if you can pilot those champions. Like, has anyone ever played that comp before? You get some wacky comps, like, especially in the modern day when people do that shit, which I can't handle. They still do it. You know, where people insist on playing like the nerfed champion because they just think they're so good at it. And it's like, it's nerfed. Why are we picking it? When people do that, it just drives me crazy. But by the way, and that is definitely a Chovy classic. Chovy loves it when you nerf a Rise, and he's like, but I still like Rise. It's like, why? Just play it when it's fucking OP or whatever. There is that. Oh yeah, I had one other thing. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to remind you of something, because you actually stirred a core memory in me. This is also how old school we are, Yamato. To a modern fan, when you said about Faker streaming, that's totally normal. Of course, top players stream. It's how you make an income. Everyone has a Twitch account. We all have millions of followers, if you're a pro player, that is. What people won't know, Yamato, is for the first solid, like, I'm talking like 3-4 years of League of Legends, no Korean streamed. That was not a thing. They used to just play scrims. In fact, famously, if you remember, the thing that got Faker to stream was that partnership with Azubu. It was actually he streamed on Azubu first, if you remember, because they had all that money they were pumping into like league shit. And at the time, actually, when it was announced he was going to stream, that was like blowing people's minds. I remember the first streams had like insane numbers, mate. Like people, that was like melting people's brain that you could just watch Faker outside of like a pro match. Like we never saw it before. We take it for granted now. Like you can see everyone stream now, basically. But like, but that actually was like an event back then. Do you remember?
Yeah. Like even I remember also when he like did the move over to Twitch, like that was also such a big deal.
And got
Like
bazillion followers, mate. Yeah.
there was like this whole drama about like them copyright striking like his league games as well. I remember that shit. Like because people were restreaming just
Spectate Faker.
like the spectate faker,
Yeah.
like that whole drama. Like and also I remember the whole the drama surrounding people just betting. You could bet on Faker's games, and he would just have. The Faker solo queue experience was just the worst possible because it was just like everyone just wanted to be in those games and either troll him or fuck him up or like gank him. Like he played solo queue on the hardest difficulty possible. It was a good time. Like I remember a couple of teams. I remember was watching like Someday. Like that was like a rare streamer that you could just find on a Zubu as well. It was a different time altogether. I just wanted to reference back to the 2019 because I remember G2, of course, they won MSI and they made the finals, but every team was afraid of T1. Like it was the only team that could actually beat T1 was G2. The other teams couldn't. It's like you had the IG game where obviously there was like in that group stage at MSI where they won in 16 minutes or whatever it was because they played like Kale Taric, like Kale Sona, like I don't remember what the combo was, something wacky that came out of Europe and they decided to try to lock in. But even in that era, if something went a little bit different in terms of what the matchups were, maybe G2 was at the other side of the bracket, anything else, because FPX apparently they celebrated the same way just G2 did when they got Team Liquid in the final instead of IG. FPX was like, yes, T1 has cooked us in scrims for the last 4 weeks. We had no chance, and we get to play against G2. We are so damn happy. And it's funny how like the butterfly effect still, there's like small elements that could have changed for G2. Maybe G2 played IG in the final. Maybe the whole story would have been different. And the same thing if T1 maybe didn't play against G2, played against an FPX in the final. I think T1 maybe could have won a Worlds back then too. But there's a lot of what ifs, There's a lot of what ifs that you can go back down in the memory lane. The additional thing I wanted to add, because you mentioned like how difficult it would be for Faker. I feel like the fearless being a thing has taken Chovy out of his shell that he always put himself in. I don't know if it's some PTSD from working with CV Max of just like playing the same champion over and over again and just doing it on repeat and just not being able to pivot mid-series. Because it's like Chovy for the longest time, whether it was his first best of 5 at Worlds when he played against IG, just playing tanks mid, when obviously his top laner just couldn't play the game at all, and he just kept playing Poppy and Sion. It's like, what the hell are you doing? You need to step up to the plate. Your top laner is getting massacred by the Shy. Or these, series like, for example, at Worlds most recently, when he keeps picking Ari when everyone else has moved on to Silas and Galio. And, in some cases it worked. At MSI, he was like pre-MSI, when he won the first one, it was like 5 games of Azir. That was one of the best series of all time in terms of his performances. Sure. Sometimes it works. That MSI too, everyone was target banning his Corki, Aurelion Sol, and he could just carry on those champions. But there were scenarios always when he got to the World Championship in terms of reading the energy of the series and being able to slam something that maybe he didn't practice as much because he had this fear of being less precise. Now with Fearless, he's kind of forced to be put in that position. And there's this looseness that I think Chovy always lacked. And I think this has just unleashed him to a whole nother level. Because even though there's cases where he's less precise in terms of how he is as a player, as an impact player in a best of 5, I do think that the range now is just immaculate because now he's forced to play 5 different champions. And now we get those game 5s where he's just bomb, Aurora 1v9s it, And I think Chovy's development, the implementation of Fearless is just a perfect thing for his career.
I also think as well, like you can just say he is just the best Aurora player, mate. There's something about that champion he's just keyed in on. He's so fucking good at it. I know what you mean though. Like the spread of champions, it's even this year. Like he started off still trying to make Ari work every fucking time he could get it the draft. Now, like he must be the ultimate coach's dream for that draft, mate. Like Kim must just be living a dream. He already has all these super giga mega players elsewhere, but then his middle and base key players, like we're talking for real players, like 8-9 champions deep. Like yeah, and I agree with you as well. The cool thing is, I know what you mean. The problem in the past that Chovy used to have is like it was predictable what he would pick. Now his logic would be if I execute correctly, I still win, which is probably true. But I think that it's one of the areas in the game that I always think people miss is like you don't have to make it hard for yourself though. You know what I mean? Like you can let the OP elements of the game mean that if in the draft, yeah, you could pick this champion, you're amazing. It's like the Faker picking LeBlanc all those years back at MSI. I don't say it's wrong, right? But if you had have picked anything else, then what they were planning wouldn't work. That's the key thing. I agree, you still could have won because you're Faker and you were cracked on that champion. But the difference is if you'd have picked something that had like short-circuited their whole draft, they'd be the ones that are on the back foot. Like, fuck, what do we do now? Like, we planned for you to do that. And I always think the difference now is when Chovy locks in those like deeper, like say he locks in like the fucking, I mean, he still plays all of them, Galio, fucking Annie, whatever. Because he just puts it when it's like the right time. Now he is unbeatable because he's the best player, and then he's picking like the OP shit in the draft that makes sense for the comp. Like, because there's another thing. There's been a lot of years where you felt like, in a negative way, people in his team saw him make his pick. Like, fuck, how did we work around that? I could totally believe he's on the same page as like their pre-draft meeting now. You know, in fact, if anything, he actually looks like he's become a good teammate in that sense, mate.
Oh yeah, definitely. As the development of Chovy it's incredible that he finds a way to kind of surpass himself every year.
Yeah,
because every year the same conversation, and rightfully so, the conversation is that because just in terms of how he plays at an individual level, was always there, and he's just answering time and time again when questions come up. It's like, how will he do in Fearless? It kind of contradicts what he does, and he just finds a way to shine. But to circle back to the initial part of the conversation, it's like if T1 managed to do it this year, Faker managed to do it this year, it's like the opposite side of that is Chovy does manage to do it this year with this squad. I don't know what will, bro. We need to release League 2. We need to start over. It's just done.
By the way, the other reason why if you win now, if you Faker it is the ultimate win, is because then you just make it so that, like, even just in terms of the time left in the game, there's probably not enough time left for Chovy to win enough worlds at that point, is there? Like, if you have the fucking 6, then yeah, by the way, you just have 1 yet. You're in a pretty good spot. You're probably safe at that point in time, aren't you? So, no, that's also the other thing I also like about Faker in this part of his career. He also understands the old man game, which I've always thought is underrated as well, from a career perspective. Because I always told people, right, even though, yes, I do think people like Faker and Roger Federer and Ronaldo do also play for the love of the game. They clearly have like a crazy passion to play where they almost like a child do enjoy just, the practice and playing the warm-ups and stuff. But another reason you keep playing as long as you can is to deny the other rivals championships. Like I always thought Federer, mate, if he'd have really had like the 20 Grand Slams, but like 10 years ago, and he hadn't have had a true rival, say Nadal only ever won on clay, no one else was close to his, he just retired way earlier in my opinion, because he had a bunch of injuries, by the way. He would have like, shoulder injury and then a knee injury. But I think the reason he kept coming back was because if you nick even one of those Grand Slams from your opponent, you know how much harder you make it for them, for the little kid in 20 years looking for it to look as good on the Wikipedia. Like you're actually you're shadow boxing like history when you do that. You're not even just directly playing this guy. You're denying him a chance to get to your total or to surpass you, etc. Which is underrated. I do think so. Because I can tell you the sports where people did just retire when they were number one. That's why in that documentary, Michael Jordan was super salty about not getting to play with the Bulls. Because at the time, mate, it's fine. You're like, I'm the greatest. Okay. But if in 10 years from now, someone wins 11 championships or something, like Bill Russell did back in the day, you're going to wish you'd played every year you could. You're going to think, fuck, what if I had 2 more in me? That's going to torture you.
Yeah, you mentioned like the retirement aspect of it. That's also like if Faker just wins and retires.
That's a gangster way to go out too, innit? I know. Also, think how sick this would be, Martin. Do you know why that would actually be the most gangster move? Because you won worlds in the first year of your career, and then you win it in the last, and just go, see ya, and just ride off over the sunset with the fucking silhouette. Like that's how you leave God mode style, innit? And I tell you what, this is what I'd even do. Listen, Faker won't do this because listen, he's gonna have to. He's still a young man outside of the esports context. He has his whole life ahead of him. He probably has to have another career. Probably even has to have a career connected to esports. esports, I imagine he'll be a coach or a figure within the scene or something. But the most gangster move, really, Yamato, is if this really was like, you know, sports where you could make hundreds of millions of dollars, the most gangster move would be you win the last Worlds in the last year of your career, by the way, 10 plus years into your career, and then literally the last time anyone ever sees or hears from you is you exit that broadcast. Yeah. That would be God tier, mate. Imagine you literally go away, you're in seclusion, you're like one of those authors that no one's heard from in 30 years, they're reclusive, JD Salinger shit. No one's even seen a picture of you for years. You got all the Chinese spies shimmying up trees, trying to go down drain pipes, infrared thermal imaging. They can't ever see you, and no one ever hears from you again. And then you just say some, oh yeah, obviously logically you have to say some shit like on the way out, like, and the rest of my career is for you, the T1 fans, and then leave the audience. Oh my God! Oh, Faker! And then eventually, in 100 years, you know, legends will come that Faker will return one day when Korea has become worthy enough.
He's like, turns out he was Satoshi, you know, the creator of Bitcoin. You know, he just did that.
He was just
as a side project
Bitcoin the whole time. No, yeah. You know what, you've mixed it. That's how we should tie it together. What happens is when Faker finally wins his last Worlds in 2 years, that's when finally the last Bitcoin is mined. And it's revealed that he was actually the creator of Bitcoin. And now he's got like $10 trillion. He just fucks off, like lives in space or something. You know what I mean? Like, there you go. There you go.
I watch that movie.
Yeah, like Interstellar.
We need Spielberg in here, you know? Like we should get this done. I like it. I like it.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.